I think keeping the vet as the most relevant resource for pet owners is important. And paying attention to the way we price services is a part of that.
Welcome to the Veterinary Financial Podcast, where we discuss financial freedom and whole life success. I'm Meredith Jones, a veterinarian and financial planner.
And I'm Willie Bedott, a lab animal specialist and a money nerd.
Our guest today is Chris Kelly. He's the managing partner for Antelligence, which publishes the Fountain Report and the Veterinary Student Insider. He's also the editor-in-chief for Veterinary Advantage Magazine, an NAVC business publication. Chris, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, too, for having me. Meredith, Willie, hey, I'm really excited to be here. And I think this is going to be fun. So let's get after it. Let's go.
All right. Awesome. So, Chris, you've been covering the veterinary industry for over 2 decades. Could you talk about some of the trends you've seen with practices and veterinary care over the past few years?
Sure. I think, probably top of mind for everybody right now is when the corporate practices and the consolidators got very active, it changed the dynamics very quickly. Obviously, there have been big corporate practices that have been around for a long time, but as that activity picked up, and it's obviously, abated somewhat today, but I'd expect it to pick up again in the future, probably when interest rates come down and money's less expensive. But I think that dynamic of, having the corporates come in and the independent practices having, I'd say, a different type of competitor than they've been used to. And I'm not of the mindset that the corporates are bad. I mean, there may be some that don't operate quite the right way, but you could say the same thing about independent practices. So I just think the dynamic has changed. And while the landscape, looks different today than it did, say, 2 years ago, and we can talk more about that later, I do think the future for the independents looks very, very bright. I think the corporates are going to force everybody to do a better job. And I think that's a good thing. It all starts with providing great care. And as long as that's the centerpiece of what everybody's trying to do, I think we're in a good place. And I would like to tell you, obviously, I am not a veterinarian. I'm a business guy. So I look through that lens more than I do the care lens. But I have a great appreciation for what veterinary professionals, veterinarians, assistants, techs, do for us and our pets every day.
So, going back to the magazine, what is the focus of the Veterinary Advantage Magazine?
So Veterinary Advantage, the focus there is distribution salespeople. So I had sold that publication along with a number of other products that were associated with it to the NAVC back in 2017. Great people. I worked for them for 3 years. I still have a part-time gig with Veterinary Advantage Magazine. And the goal of that publication has always been to help distributor sales reps better understand providing value to their customers. How can they make their customers better? Be it marketing, be it care, be it, efficiencies in the practice. For many, many years, the distributor rep has played that role of being the go-to for many different practices, both the corporates as well as the independents. So that's our focus there. It's not my full-time focus anymore, but it's still a good, healthy publication that sits in the middle of, 4 or 5 different publications that the NAVC does.
Okay, awesome. Could you tell us more about the Fountain Report for listeners who may not be familiar with it?
Sure. The Fountain Report is, probably what Antelligence, my new business, is best known for. The funny thing is, I bought it back for the second time, right before the NAVC bought us and kind of rolled everything we did into their ecosystem. I had purchased the Fountain Report from 2 smart guys who are ex-Pfizer, now Zoetis, and really used it as a way to bring in new customers. And they were in their mid-70s and ready to get out, so it worked out really well for all of us. And when we went into the NAVC, we had big plans for what we could do. And there were bigger things that had to get done first. They wanted us to start a new magazine. So, collectively, we came up with and started Today's Veterinary Business, which was a labor of love. That was a fun start. That was, the NAVC team as well as our team at Vet Advantage. And that kind of took precedence. And then when COVID hit, Now, obviously things changed and the Fountain Report never really got, the kind of the TLC that it needed. So they said, hey, I called and said, would you guys consider selling this back to us? And they said yes. They made us a very fair deal. We did a rev share with them, which, we just finished off, which is nice. I guess we don't have to cut those checks every year. But they were great in return. They gave us a lot of publicity. They've always been great partners and good people. So the Fountain Report today is much different than when we bought it. Typically, it was just curation of news across all segments of animal health. When we bought it, we spent about 6 months revamping it. And our goal was to keep that news, that piece, kind of in the center. And we're really about financial news more than anything, although we cover a lot of different news. We want it to be the news resource. But then we added insights from people in the industry that are very respected and have viewpoints that we want to be able to share across our audience. And then we found some data providers that wanted to, send us data that kind of, when you combine that with insights and news, gives the reader kind of that 360-degree view of what's going on in the business and what it means to them. So at the end of the day, if we're delivering timely and comprehensive information and insights, to the right people, hopefully we're enabling them to make better decisions in their businesses. And if we can continue to do that, I think we're doing a good job of it right now. We want to get better. I think we'll have a place in this industry for a long time.
Great. So you mentioned COVID and how everything kind of changed, but I feel like it changed COVID. Then, at the end of COVID, the behavior switched, and now I feel like there's another behavioral, and I'm talking about pet ownership. So what are the most recent pet ownership trends?
Well, that's a good question. If we step back and take kind of a more global look at the industry, it's really healthy, right? The APPA, the American Pet Products Association, that number they put out of annual expenditures, they gauged that at 147 billion last year in 2023. That was up about 7% from the year before. And they're projecting it to be, I want to say, over 200 billion by the year 2030. So suffice to say, we're in good space. Not really COVID, but I'd say, kind of the economic effects. Some of it was due to COVID and supply chains, but it feels different today. In that same APPA data, they projected a flat year in 2024, and that's what it feels like. And for many of us, we're not used to a slow year and a down cycle. The joke used to be, back in like 2008 and 2009, we're not recession proof, but we're recession resilient. While everybody else is down 15%, we might be down a point or two, but, or we might be up just a point or two, not at the normal 5 to 7% that we've seen traditionally. So I think operating in that environment is just a different thing. And I think it makes all of us think differently. It's not as comfortable. It means you need to do things differently. It's not as easy, but I guess where we all get to prove our mettle at the end of the day, right? It's not just coming at us so fast and we're just dealing with it. It's all right. How are we going to get better at this? What are we going to do better? I read a lot of financial publications, and I do it because I want to keep up with what's good for my business and certainly what I think might be good for our readers to be exposed to. So, the Fed has said they've achieved a soft landing, meaning no recession. I hope that's true. I think we all kind of have our fingers crossed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we don't have a recession, but it doesn't feel right. Inflation has just been very stubborn. I look at it very pragmatically. It's like, well, we're going to go out to dinner and have sushi, and what used to be $100 is now 160. And I look at what I pay for car insurance. We all look at homeowners insurance has gone through the roof, groceries, gas. And I think it just puts everybody in a mindset of, all right, we need to look at this, perhaps the way we spend our discretionary income a little bit differently because there's probably just less of it. If you look at the cost of borrowing money, it's more than doubled what it was 2 or 3 years ago. That changes a lot. The cost of housing is up probably 30%, since the beginning of the pandemic. Student loan payments, although they get a lot of press for the ones that are being forgiven, there's still a lot of people that are now starting to pay those student loans again. And when you talk about the relation of that dynamic to, the major majority of pet owners who are millennials and Gen Z, or close to the majority, that's a big hit on some of them and their discretionary income. So certainly the consumer is the growth engine of the U.S. economy. And I think right now the consumer is really cautious. And I think businesses are too. So we're not running at the same pace we used to. I'd say we're, proceeding very cautiously and with an eye on, okay, what's next? Are we in for a surprise? Or, we're going to get back to where we were 2-3 years ago.
And how does those impacts or trends in the economy impact differently independent practices and corporate practices? Because I'm sure there's a big difference as far as how they are affected.
I think there's certainly been an effect, right? We've had these terrible staffing shortages, but it looks like that worm is starting to turn a little bit. I hope it's not just because there's less demand, but certainly that put a lot of stress on everybody's staffs. So whether you're in a corporate or whether you're in an independent practice, you felt some pain. And we all know it's wreaked havoc on people's lives and personal and business lives. The happiness metrics that were just reported on, I think it was packaged facts, are up. And I view that as very positive because happy employees mean probably better care for pets, happier pet owners. We're all happier. Practice revenue right now, and you can look at different resources, the VHMA survey that they do, the Vet Watch, which we cover and usually comment on in each Fountain report. It looks like revenues, like the increases are healthy. It's running close to 5%. And everybody thinks, wow, that's great. We're still growing the business. But if you look at transactions and new patient visits and patient visits, they're all down. So it means that we're doing this on price increases. And I'm not sure those price increases are sustainable. And we've said that for a number of years. We keep getting away with it. But I think, given the economic picture and the fact that we have a lot of millennial and Gen Z pet owners, I don't think that it's going to be sustainable. So another one that floated across my desk was that vet customers are down 9.5% between 2018 and 2023, and that was packaged facts. So, at the end of the day, if only affluent people can afford care, I don't think that's a good place for our industry to be. I certainly think this spectrum of care approach is helping, but we've got to make sure that, we're getting more pets in front of veterinarians so they get the care that they need.
So we talk about inflation, and then you mentioned, we're seeing less animals, but we're charging more. Do you have a number as how much the veterinary profession has been increasing prices on a yearly basis?
I don't, but I think it's pretty consistent. I don't have any specific data, and I have more gut level data coming from some of those resources that I referenced earlier. So it's always up. Where they're raising, I don't know. I know, certain practices have implemented new fees. At the end of the day, the last thing we want to do is to destroy demand and push, pet owners into different places to find care. And I think one of the things, if you take a look at some of the generational data, given that millennials and Gen Z, now about half of the pet owners, they're more apt to not go to the vet first and go to a different resource. We don't like to talk about that, but they're very comfortable going to the internet, going to a retailer, going to a friend who knows somebody. They're seeking information from a number of different sources. And if they feel like they can't have the experience they want with the veterinarian, they may choose to go elsewhere. And I'm not sure that's the last thing that we want to do. I think as an industry, we want to make sure that especially the younger demographics still put the vet in the middle of everything when it comes to care. I think it's a no-brainer. I'm a baby boomer. We do it. Gen X does it. Hate to admit I'm a baby boomer. Tail end, okay? But I think keeping the vet as the most relevant resource for pet owners is important. And paying attention to the way we price services is a part of that.
So, Willie, I'm going to turn a question to you because I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on what Chris has been saying about accessibility of care. I know you've worked in some lower cost environments and just wondering what you think about what Chris is saying here.
It's tough, what I see, and I frankly don't practice. So what I see is pretty much my nonprofit work. When we're talking about clients and us veterinarians who criticize the people, as you mentioned, like, oh, they're going elsewhere for their information. But frankly, what I'm seeing in these nonprofit events is that they just really can't go anywhere. And since we are not transparent with prices, they're worried that if they go to the vet to get their animals spayed or neutered, it's going to cost them hundreds of dollars. Again, we spay and neuter hundreds of animals in one day. There's people that sleep at the location that we're doing these services because, again, they frankly don't know maybe where to get the services, or they don't know the pricing of the services. So they just think, okay, these people are going to do it for free. I'm just going to go ahead and do that. When, hey, there's low-cost clinics that you could have probably gone, not wasted 24 hours of your day, not have you stressed out, your pet stressed out. But again, it's a matter of where these people are getting their information.
I agree.
Yeah. And Chris, so what are your thoughts for independent practices in the current environment with what's going on in the economy and what's going on in the vet industry? What are your thoughts on how independent practices can compete with corporate groups?
Well, I think going back to, the statement earlier, the corporate groups aren't bad. And I don't think in any business you ever want to disparage your competitors. I think the work that should be done is making what you do markedly better than what they do. So I think the table stakes have gotten higher. There's more money, there's more talent, there's more people. Not saying they all understand, the veterinary culture the way, most independent veterinarians do, but they're going to be a player. And I think they're going to help all of us, like I said earlier, raise our game. So my recommendations would be, from my perspective and just watching what's going on, probably focus in 3 areas. 1, just provide great care. You can't lose. And that word of mouth is as, important today as it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. I do think more focus on the customer or the pet owner and their experience is critical, because I think that's where a lot of veterinary practices have just said, hey, look, we've got all we can handle. They're just going to do it my way because that's the way we've always done it. It's successful. Animals are well taken care of. Most of my customers are happy. We'll be fine. But I think customer experience. And then I think third is probably efficiency. So, if you look at the customer experience that some of these de novos are providing, we talked about them earlier, it's wonderful. It's salon-like. You walk in, you're well taken care of. There's bright lights. You're greeted. You can schedule your appointment digitally. You can get a hold of people when nobody's in the office. All of these things make a big difference to the younger generations that we've referenced. So I think, paying attention to that and then making sure when they're in your practice that you exceed their expectations. Chewy's famous for it, right? I mean, we all hear about, gosh, my dog passed away and I told them to stop the auto ship and they sent me a card, all personalized, signed by the people that I deal with. They're great at it and it's helping them build a really good business. But I think veterinarians need to think the same way. All right, how do we make that experience everything that they want? And I think a part of that too is understanding that the pressures we talked about earlier, driven by the economy, should be addressed when, they're with the pet owner. So I would say, take a look. 2 years ago, it was all about premium products. We're going to buy the best dog food. I want it for my pet. Well, you know what? When your discretionary income gets halved and inflation kind of wreaks havoc on the economy, and good news is it seems to be slowing down. And if we can get government spending down, we can probably tame it sooner rather than later. But that's a whole nother conversation. But I think understanding that a lot of those customers are looking for a value product today as opposed to a premium product is important. And I'm a big fan of brands. They've really driven our business forward, but there might be instances where, there's a generic that's equally as good, If I'm in the practice's shoes, I'd make sure I'm making the same dollars on it that I do for the branded product. If you can substitute products like that and do it less expensively and lessen the pain, it's great. If you can bring up financing resources, if there's a bigger bill with a scratch or a care credit or somebody like that, that's good as well. So I think really understanding the customer and making sure that you hit those high points, spectrum of care, and kind of that approach to it, I think makes a lot of sense. And then maybe last on the efficiency piece, I think there's a real opportunity with technology for practices to get more efficient very quickly. I'm afraid of AI. I think everybody's afraid of AI at some level, right? But if you look at AI and what it can do within the practice, not just with radiographs, but with transcribing your daily notes, you're talking about, I just saw a demonstration of Covet's product and, you're talking about something that might save an hour and a half a day, taking away the thing most veterinarians and technicians hate most. So I think looking at solutions like that can drive efficiency are important. And I would still argue, again, it's not a blanket statement, but we can do a better job of utilizing technicians and having them do a certain type of work and trusting them with it. Most of them are well qualified to do it and, get more throughput. If you get more throughput, maybe you're not forced to raise your prices the way they have been today just to keep up. And I don't want to be critical of any practices raising their prices. They're paying more for a lot. So, the cost of diagnostics, the cost of supplies, all of these things are going up, meaning, they probably do have to raise their prices. But I just think it needs to be balanced with the needs of the customer right now. And I think making sure any practice keeps those customers and doesn't force them elsewhere is most important. We'll get back to a super healthy CAGR of, 4 to 5% in another couple of years, I'm sure. But today, I think it's making sure that if you've got a more competitive market, really paying attention to those three things: great care, customer experience, and operational efficiencies.
All right, awesome. So you mentioned a really big number earlier. You were talking about over 150 billion. And did that encompass the animal health industry, or was that the animal health and pet industry?
It is. It's an all-in number. And it was 147 billion in 2023, and they're projecting 150 billion in 24, a relatively flat number. And I think I want to go back and say they might even be projecting as high as 250 billion. I don't have it in front of me by the year 2030. So it does, I think the major categories like diet is the majority, veterinary care, the purchase of animals and supplies, and there's a number of things that go in there, but that's an aggregate number they put out that encompasses everything in the industry. So retail sales, veterinary care, you name it. And those numbers don't always jive with somebody else's numbers. So, you could go find a different number, and generally it's going to be close, not markedly different. But I like to use the APPA number. It's referenced quite a bit, and it's a big one. I think we always used to say it was 10 times bigger than everything Hollywood did, probably more like 20 times bigger today. So we're a substantial industry. And it's obviously, the way people and capital have flocked to it, it's seen as a great industry and long-term a growth industry.
All right, awesome. So sounds like the future, even though I guess there was a flat year with that one statistic that you quoted earlier. So it sounds like the future is bright for the industry as a whole.
I think so. Yes. I mean, I am an optimist by nature. It's me. We may have another flat year or year that's just up slightly in 25. We could have a recession and that could change things for 2 or 3 years. We've got a lot of political uncertainty, not just here in the States with the upcoming election, but, you've got real hotspots around the world that could change our business too. What's going on, in China, in the Ukraine, in Israel. If these spread, That's a wild card that I don't quite understand, but my general sense is it wouldn't be good for our business.
Mm-hmm.
And it may markedly change things. So hopefully, as a country, our government is on top of these things and making sure that we can do our best to stay out of any messes.
Hopefully.
I agree.
So you have a lot of insight in the profession, 2 decades in the profession. And as you mentioned, one thing that I do see and I appreciate a lot is talking to vendors. So those people that provide services to the industry are, for me as a veterinarian, if I ever started a clinic, they are so beneficial to talk to these people because they're traveling around the country, seeing different clinics. And again, I'm trying to start a business, and I try to feed out of them. I guess overall, I just wanted to ask you, what's the best way for our listeners to get a hold of you?
Well, they can get a hold of me anytime. My email, I can provide it, or if you guys provide it after, that's fine, whatever you'd like me to do.
Mm-hmm.
But I am in complete agreement with you that vendors are a great resource. And I think smart practices bring the vendors in, develop relationships, and the smart vendors, be it, a manufacturer or a distributor, it shouldn't always be about product. It should be about what's going on that they see locally and regionally, what other people are doing. They can't give away trade secrets, but they can make suggestions that can really help practices do better. And if vendors are looked to as that resource, they're going to do well. And, I have talked to practice managers and people that buy for the practices that are like, I don't have time to see vendors. And, I'm kind of upset I have to pay commissions, but like, well, look, the commissions don't change whether they see you or whether they don't.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a really good relationship with the vendor community, they're going to tend to treat you better. You're probably going to be able to convince them on a Friday afternoon to run to their warehouse or their trunk, deliver you some suture that you need desperately at that point that you don't have. So I think the vendor pieces should not be overlooked. They're a great resource, and the smart ones are very passionate about helping their customers do better business.
So again, I run a nonprofit and we run through a lot of supplies with the spays and neuters, and you just reminded me of those vendors that I'm like, I can call them right now and they'll figure out how to send me whatever I need.
Yeah.
To Puerto Rico, right?
Yeah, to Puerto Rico. And that's the biggest issue also. It's to Puerto Rico. So yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, it is. Like that was our focus with Vet Advantage. And I just think that, I would hate to see those relationships change. They are somewhat at the corporate level. Those deals get struck. Sometimes they involve sales reps coming and calling on the clinics. Other times they don't. If they don't, for margin savings, I think there's a miss because I think that local knowledge, even to drive forward an important program. So if a corporate signs on with a vendor, take on a lot of product and drive a certain activity, they're going to need help in doing that. And that help can often come from the distributors and the other vendors. So hopefully, the market tends to work all these things out. And I think if you're delivering value, that value gets recognized and ultimately gets paid for.
All right. Fantastic. Chris, thanks so much for your insights today. So that brings us to our last question. What is your best advice for our listeners?
So I guess I would probably say, treat other people like you would like to be treated. I know it sounds trite. Everybody says it, but it's real. And like our mantra internally, intelligence is DLR. So treat everybody with dignity, love, and respect. And I think if you can do those things across the board, regardless of who you're dealing with, even if they're difficult, we all win.
All right. Love it. Chris, thank you so much.
Well, thank you guys for having me. I enjoyed it and look forward to future interactions.
Thanks, Chris.
If you liked this episode, click the follow or subscribe button. Until next time, take care and continue your path to financial success.
The information provided in this podcast is for informational purposes only. It should not be considered legal or financial advice. Consult with a legal or financial professional before making any investment decisions.